I think there was a mix-up in the titles of the talk, so you'll see it later. It's gonna be a surprise. That's fine. Yeah, it's even better. Yeah, exactly. So, hello everyone. Full disclosure, I'm an artist, and I must admit that I do not know that much about general semantics. But as an artist working with representation, I do know a bit about semantics in general. Let's hope that's good enough. Um, and I'd like to mention that despite not being well versed into general semantics, I really appreciated the eclectic nature of this conference, which I found very refreshing. So thanks to the organizers for that. So in my practice, I'm interested in old and unloved machines and how they can become material for art, basically. And I love lines. I'm always working with lines. I'm also a practice-based researcher, and I'm here to discuss the creative process, and especially its epistemological quest for meaning. So that's the actual topic for the talk today. But before talking about matter wandering, which is the topic of this talk, I'd like to begin by looking at the concept of mind wandering, which I'm guessing pretty much everyone is familiar with. Philosophers, neuroscientists, and psychologists have all linked mind wandering with creativity. Perhaps more interestingly, in the context of this talk, Baird et al. Demonstrated that mind wandering is more frequent while performing undemanding tasks than it is while performing demanding tasks or even no tasks at all. One such undemanding task is taking a shower. So there might actually be scientific evidence behind shower thoughts. In any case, this suggests that an undemanding engagement with matter might actually promote creativity. And this is basically what this talk is about. What I suggest is that material engagement can potentially be developed into a creative methodology, and that this topic has been under investigated, especially from a practitioner's perspective. Before going further, I should mention that what follows is an account based on basically autoethnographic observations. I'll try to anchor it in relevant literature, but it remains highly situated to my own practice. By sharing it, I hope it finds echo in other practices in the realm of arts, but potentially beyond that, hopefully beyond that. And if it does, I'd like to hear about it. So these are the kinds of things I work with. The cultural theorists frame this as media archaeology. And I usually start my explorations with what Bruce Sterling called dead media, or with some, like this one, otherwise unloved, forgotten, obsolete, out of trend technological artifact. For example, this device was the starting point of an interactive installation that I presented during the 2018 edition of the 404 Festival held in Japan. It's a pen plotter. It was used in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, so before laser and inkjet printers, to draw charts and floor plans and technical drawings and these kinds of things. It is a technical media device, which is highly scripted. It was meant to be used in specific ways to accomplish specific tasks. It comes embedded with technical, social, and political values. In my artistic practice, my goal is to reveal the potentialities of such objects and hopefully upcycle them as source material in the creation of interactive art. So, how can that be done? Well, the key for me is to start matter wandering without a project and without a time frame. And this may feel as a luxury, but it's the only way I've been able to research and sketch out my work. So matter wandering is not a trip or a stroll. There's no destination, no sites, no located time frame. Basically, I call this technique errancy. It is akin to what Guy Debord and the Situationist called dérive or drifting. Creating without a project I believe, is a very subversive act. In industrialized societies, children are taught from a very young age to anticipate the future of their own lives, and basically we're instructed to view life itself as a project. We must have goals and a time frame to achieve, like to reach them, to meet them. And so we're encouraged to believe that the most efficient way is most likely the best way. And while this is not necessarily always bad in and of itself, it is useful to be aware that this is how we've been formatted, both implicitly and explicitly. However, alternatives do exist. So instead of starting with a project, my research creation work adopts a bottom-up, I guess, nonlinear, rhizomatic approach. And this is kind of a reversing of the traditional positivistic research sequence. With such an approach, as Bartlett says, questions and meaning, I will add, often emerge towards the end rather than the beginning of the process. So the idea is to start with matter and end up with meaning. So how does one do that? Well, literal errancy involves physical movement on actual terrain. But in the context of matter wandering, it's more relevant, as Lepeke does, to turn to a more etymological definition. So errancy as to drift, to get lost, to go astray. And this drifting is basically performed with what Lepeke calls ethical persistence. So this idea of adding a will to keep going without necessarily needing to know where we are heading. Basically, I get lost in the materiality of things, of technical artifacts. I'll be exploring, touching, dismantling, reassembling, testing, whatever. And for the purpose of meaning making, I basically use Levi-Strauss's bricolage approach, but in a quite literal way. That is by trial and error, with on-hand materials and on-mind knowledge. And so, unlike the engineer, the bricoleur, or artist for that matter, does not have to necessarily master the entirety of the language or of its semantics before being able to reach meaningful results. According to Derrida, the bricoleur approach generates both intellectual activity and mythopoetical activity. So in this sense, this idea of matter wandering kind of merges with mind wandering in sort of symbiosis, I guess, for the purpose of meaning making. Errancy, by definition, is unscripted. So I guess matter wandering could be taking various forms. So I'm not trying to a full cartography of these forms, but there are some recurring patterns, at least in my own practice. And so I'm sharing a few, but I'm guessing many more can be uncovered. I'll have to ask my fellow artists. So obviously, first, the matter is surveyed through senses. The encounter is visual. We've spoken about that earlier. Haptic, auditory, but also proprioceptive, vestibular. All senses are involved. And usually salient features and affordances tend to be explored first. Obviously, recognized saliency is not only an objective property. It is often a relational property between object and subject, if two such things really do exist, but that's another topic. So the sensory survey of matter is tied to embodiment, obviously, and what we perceive is linked to our own physicality, but also to our own experience, culture, knowledge, sense of aesthetics, etc. And so this survey, which starts in a physical way, is also a cognitive survey, which brings me to forensics. Working with these old machines, one starts to wonder, well, what were they used for? In what context? By whom? What were the forces involved in all that? And so this leads to this scripting phase, in the sense that Madeleine Acriche meant it. So what is the script embedded in such objects? What are the traces of the people who created it, of the time it was conceptualized in? Thank you. And then the survey is also that of what the object could become. And this prospective imaginary object is basically a product of the sensory survey and our cognitive predispositions. Basically, it's an improvisation with matter. Let's put it like that. Becker has argued that improvisation is not about complete freedom. It's based on pre-existing structures. These structures will guide the improvisational moment. The object is like its own structures, the subject also does, and something happens at the intersection of the two. As Bartlett says, improvisatory modes of inquiry allow autoethnographers to explore open spaces where the unplanned and unexpected are central to the research process. So while I know this to be true in my own practice, I suspect it could be a highly valuable mindset in fields way beyond art. Obviously, by navigating the terrain without a map, you're bound to make mistakes and errors. Accidents will occur. And so this is me, really not sure if it was a good idea to remove those glued piezos. But the thing is that ambiguity weakens our stance, and it puts us in this awkward, unstable territory. But this weird, unstable territory invites discovery. In the Accident of Art, Virilio and Luttringer say accidents can free us from speed's inertia. As technological catastrophes, accidents are inventions in their own right. So by always wanting to go fast, to produce, to be efficient, we probably miss on a lot of things. Errors and accidents provide pause. And by using errancy as methodology, we allow for the wrong paths to be taken. We know errors will be committed, accidents will happen, but that's kind of the point of it. Furthermore, in matter wandering, these errors are often physically experienced, and I could tell you about that. But this does provide an extra layer or level of embodied insights into these objects and what they could become. To quote Watley, error is intrinsic to the creative process. Besides allowing for error, errancy also allows for surprise. And the question now is, how sure am I that I will stumble upon anything interesting? Well, obviously, there's no guarantee there. But, well, you know, sometimes like it's more like a marathon than it is a sprint. But in my experience, I've never abandoned such wanderings because I considered them pointless. They don't always lead to creative outcomes. But they often do, in my case anyway. But they usually have some form of retribution, something learned, something felt, something encountered. I think we all know that we can search and not find. But in this context, perhaps what's more relevant, it is we can also find and not search. And this is where the concept of serendipity comes in. Serendipity is not dumb luck. Serendipity is a mode of encounter. By setting yourself on a path to errancy, you acknowledge and welcome the possibility of encounters. So basically, serendipity happens when you stumble upon something and you're curious enough to recognize it may be worth investigating more. The discovery of Velcro, microwave ovens, smoke detectors, artificial sweeteners, X-ray imaging, and so on, they all happened out of chance, but also because someone was exploring while being receptive, knowledgeable, and curious enough to go beyond the accidental encounter. The serendipiter is a protagonist. He's a proactive wanderer. In a lot of scientific literature interested by the creative process, we see mostly the same stages ordered in mostly the same linear fashion. It's as though creativity can only be conceived as an ordered process. Simply using the word stages or process implies some form of ordering. And so the authors of this paper see art, and I'm quoting it, as the archetypal domain of creativity. And they go on to frame art as problem solving, like much of the literature they reviewed. The word problem appears 37 times in this paper. Art is not a problem to be solved. And using this kind of terminology feels very odd to me. And I'm suspecting it does feel odd to many other art practitioners as well. The thing is, these models are being taught in art schools. And I can understand how stress-inducing it must be for students when they do not get that eureka moment, despite the fact that they're in this incubation phase and this is where it's supposed to happen. And so this is part of the reason I feel we need this autoethnographic report approach from artists, researchers who can challenge such positivistic models of creativity and art research, art practice. The matter-wandering methodology and the errancy technique I described today do not pretend to be generalizable models. In fact, I'm much more interested in cartographies of such situated and iconoclastic methodologies. And instead of yet another model driven by problematization, here's a much better representation of my nonlinear, rhizomatic, discontinuous, situated model of artistic creativity. Thank you.